Welcome back to what I guess I am now calling a podcast. I wasn't calling it that at first, but here we are, and I think it's time that we actually call it that. Now, it's not on the podcast platforms. Maybe it'll be on there eventually, but there's very minimal cuts, so I guess we can call it just that. And today we're talking about a tech-heavy one. So if you've been following, I've been talking about tech stuff, and I've also been talking about just my thoughts on different topics. So I enjoy going into the tech. I'm only really going to talk about tech that I personally use on an everyday basis. And today we're talking about my favorite lens that is in my bag. It is the RF 24-70 f2.8. This lens is an absolute beast, and it is the number one lens in my bag. If I had to sell every single lens and somebody told me I could only keep one, I know exactly which one I'm keeping, and it is the 24-70, which is what I'm shooting this on right now. That's why I don't have it in my hand. I was skeptical about buying a 24-70 whenever I was coming up. You know, people see the big 70-200 and it seems so glamorous. And then they also start shooting more and you love the 16 millimeter look. So I bought the 16-35 and the 70-200 before I bought the 24-70. The reason that I waited a little bit to buy this 24-70 is because I had a 24-105 before. The first nice lens that I actually bought was my 24-105. This is the first EF lens that I would recommend to anyone to buy. It's affordable, it's nice, and it covers a focal range that you can pretty much never go wrong with. Today in this video, we are comparing this lens, the RF 24-70, to two different lenses. We're going to compare it to the RF 28-70 f2 as well as the EF 24-70. These are the two lenses that I think people bounce back and forth around before they buy this lens, the 24-70 2.8 RF. So first, let's talk about the 28-70 f2. The 28-70 f2 is an absolute beast. I've used it before, and it just might be one of the sharpest lenses that I've ever used in my life. Now, it's probably a combination with the beautiful glass that it uses on top of it being an f2, but I didn't personally want it. I thought about buying it for a while, and then I got it in hand, and it's so heavy. I don't know if you've ever held a 70-200 before, but it's just as heavy, if not maybe even a little bit heavier. I didn't necessarily like that. I'm a run and gun shooter. I like to just have my body and my lens, and if it's going to be super heavy, then I almost want to say count me out. I love the fact that the RF 24-70 is not that heavy. You know, it's still a heavy lens. It's heavier than a kit lens. It's heavier than a 24-105. But whenever you have it next to the 28-70, it is a big, big difference. Now, don't get me wrong, the 28-70 is really nice, but another drawback from it is that it has that 92 millimeter thread. Whenever you're using a 92 millimeter thread, you have to worry about ND filters. If you're shooting outside, if you're shooting video outside, you have to worry about the fact that you might want a variable ND filter. Have fun finding a 92 millimeter variable ND filter. The 82 millimeter ones that my lens takes right now, they're still expensive and they're a lot more accessible. The Sony's top of the line G Master lenses typically have the 82 millimeter thread. Most of the Canon's top of the line lenses have it. So it wasn't necessarily that hard to find one. But whenever you have a lens like the 28-70 that is so much bigger than everything else, you're going to have a hard time. I don't know if you'll even be able to find a variable ND. You might have to get separate NDs, which in my opinion is annoying. I like having a variable ND so it covers all of the ground. I have to carry less glass around with me whenever I'm shooting. Another thing that I really like about the RF 24-70 over the 28-70 is that it has image stabilization. Whenever you can't necessarily use a gimbal all the time, image stabilization comes in handy. But on top of that, if you're using a camera that's not the EOS R5, if you're using the Komodo, for example, you might want a little bit of stabilization. You're not going to have the in-body stabilization that you have in some mirrorless cameras. Whenever you have the R5, you can kind of get away with the 28-70 having no image stabilization because you still do have the in-body stabilization. But whenever you're using a Komodo, maybe a C70, you kind of have to be worried about it. I'm not sure if the C70 has image stabilization in body, but I feel like it doesn't since it's a cinema camera. Correct me down below if I'm wrong about that, but I haven't necessarily looked into that camera a whole lot. I really, really like my 24-70 f2. I think it is one of the sharpest lenses that I've ever used, and I just can't get enough of it. I love the fact that I can use it in pretty much any scenario. It was the third lens of the holy trinity of lenses that I got. The order that I got them was I got a 16-35, and I used that for pretty much everything. And then I started shooting some sports, and I got the 70-200, and then I kind of got sick of my 24-105. So there's one solution to that. Get that middle range lens. Get that beautiful lens to fill out that middle area. After I got this lens right here, I pretty much stopped using the other two as much as I used to. Now, does that bother me? Maybe a little bit because I have these $1,500 lenses just sitting on my shelf. But that's what made it worth it for me to get the RF 24-70 over the EF. I knew I was going to be using this lens so much. And granted, I love this lens. I use it for everything from events to portraits to shooting interviews, everything. Everything that I shoot, this is my top tier lens. It's usually the lens that's on my camera 90% of the time. Sometimes I'm using the 70-200, but that's for very niche situations. For example, when I'm shooting sports. But this lens right here, the 24-70, is a beast. So like I mentioned, that is why I got it over the EF one. If you don't necessarily have the money right now to go out and spend the extra money on the RF 24-70, by all means, the EF lens is going to be amazing too. I would still recommend it. That's actually the first one that I ever used. My friend Sean had it and kind of put me on to the 24-70. I was skeptical about it before, but having the 2.8 over the f4, so I was using the 24-105, upgrading to the 24-70 to have the f2.8 was really nice, especially in the low light. But let's go back to comparing the EF 24-70 to the RF 24-70. The big thing that I love about the RF, like I said, compared to the 28-70, is that it has image stabilization. You cannot go wrong with some image stabilization in the lens. In my opinion, it kind of saves you whenever you're doing handheld. In-body stabilization kind of gets jittery whenever you're shooting handheld, but the in-lens stabilization is actually really nice. If you're shooting handheld on a cinema rig, it especially is nice. It takes out those micro jitters while you still have that handheld look. Now the EF 24-70, you're going to have to pair with a converter. So we're talking about this in the situation that you already have an RF mount lens, and that's because you're considering the RF versus the EF. That's the only reason that I assume that. And you're not going to go wrong with it. The nice thing actually about the EF 24-70 is that you can pair it with the converter that has the ND filter in it. That means that you don't have to have any more glass on the outside, and instead you can have one ND filter for all of your EF lenses. If you have a 16-35, 24-70, and 70-200, you're going to be able to use the same ND filter for all of them, which is really nice, and it'll probably save you some money. But I decided to get the RF for a couple different reasons. Number one was that I knew I was going to be using it every single day, and I wanted an absolute workhorse and the newest lens on the market so that it could hold up with my workflow. I really wanted to be able to use this thing in every single scenario and have the best autofocus and also have that in-lens stabilization. The second reason that I got this lens is because I was upgrading from the EOS R to the EOS R5 at about the same time. Whenever I got the R5, I wanted to use that as my main cam and the R as my B cam. But whenever I only had EF lenses, I either needed to buy an RF lens or buy another converter so I could use both cameras at the same time. This is a big reason that I went with this lens, because now I can have the 24-70, which I'm pretty much always using on one camera, and then I can have the converter with any other lens on my other camera. For example, whenever I'm doing interviews, I usually have the R5 with the 24-70 on the main cam, and then on the B cam, I have the EOS R with my converter and the 70-200. So that's an off cam getting a tighter shot on the head, which is how I like to have my B cam look. But at the end of the day, you're not going to go wrong with any of these three lenses. The price point for the EF lens is going to be lower, and then as you go up, the 28-70 is clearly going to be the more expensive. The 28-70 might be for you if you're looking for a super sharp lens and don't necessarily care about the form factor. The RF 24-70 might be for you if you're looking for that happy medium, if you're going to use it all the time and you still want the top of the line autofocus. And the EF1 is probably for you if you already have a converter and don't necessarily have the extra money to spend on an RF lens. At the end of the day, they're all beautiful lenses. They're all top of the line lenses coming from a company like Canon. You're not going to go wrong. I couldn't recommend any of them more than the other one, but if I had to pick one, I would pick the one that I have. I would pick my RF 24-70 f2.8 with the image stabilization. That paired up with my R5, probably my favorite combo on the market. I use it for all my photo content and my video content, and I really can't recommend it enough. So thank you so much for watching. I hope this helped you a little bit if you're trying to make a decision between these. This is the decision that I was making between these three lenses, and I'm happy with my decision. So whatever you get, I guarantee you'll like it, but I hope I gave you some insight. Peace out, guys. Have a great day. I appreciate you.